Joe Rogan one coming up. Alex Jones, CNN cancels much trailed, whatever that means, documentary after outrage from viewers. I guess that means trailer. So that's from London Independent. It's got a bunch of defamation lies that are about that as well.
Okay, we gotta walk farther than where the magic hits us, and then just wait in the mountains.
And this guy, Greedy Hayes, said, "Hey, am I a troll? It's a legitimate question. Do you genuinely believe that this man's suicide falls on Alex Jones? His experience, a life-threatening tragedy. Jones' conspiracy theories were the latest on his worries." It was a tweet with tens of thousands of tweets by one of these writers, one of these so-called journalists, saying that the kids at Sandy Hook are basically, I killed them. They don't say it, but they go, these children won't be able to see the CNN piece because they're dead. What does that even mean? And of course, the CNN piece, we know that Sandy Hook in it. That's CNN bringing all this stuff up, not me. And I need to be silenced in their hit piece because of children that I didn't kill. I mean, none of it even makes sense. And like people are saying that, even liberals are like, well, you didn't kill kids. Why are you posting kids? Here it is. It's this Don Winslow character. The Sandy Hook victims below won't be able to watch your Alex Jones documentary. But this will make
I'll just hold out until they make the creep and we'll do our attack.
The lawyers for these families are constantly in the news, misrepresenting what I've said and done to bring up this and to remind people of mass shootings and for their anti-free speech, anti-gun movement, and they bankrupted revenue. So again, I'm not talking about it except when I have to every once in a while, like now. My listeners can't stand hearing about it. It's like literally 10 years ago, and they're up there going, holy God, CNN, you can't show your hit piece designed to destroy Alex Jones because you're God, you're so powerful, you'll get big if he's on your show with no viewers, and the kids, they're dead. I mean, I have people now, at least once a month, walk up to me in parking lots, or in grocery stores, or in gas stations, and say, you murder those children, I'll beat your ass. It's happened in front of my family. I go, what children? You know. And I go, did I kill them? Well, you supported it. I mean, imagine how dumb. But this guy's not dumb. Don Winslow, he knows. He goes, look, the kids are dead. And then he shows the dad that committed suicide. Nothing to do with me. He goes, look, and Jones killed him too. Look, silence him. Look, children, I represent them. Dear CNN, how much more do these families have to endure? What are you going to do? Your Alex Jones documentary triggers another suicide or breakdown of one of these family victims. Well, you're the one talking about Sandy Hook all day yourself, buddy. So you're now guilty of what you say. And it goes on and on and on. There's one independent article claiming I attacked the Capitol. I mean, just insane. But then he had a celebration tweet with 120,000 likes. I am happy to let you know all that after running 20 commercials for it, just yesterday CNN made the decision not to air Alex Jones' documentary tonight. Power to the people. No, there's a major assault on Kiev happening, and somebody said, why the hell is that scheduled in a normal documentary slot preempted? But oh no, it's you, Don Winslow. You got everyone to censor. Aren't you a good little apparatchik? And this goes on and on and on and on. And then people say, we need to arrest Alex Jones. But again, this is what these people do while World War III is starting. They sit there and spew all this crap. Yeah, I'm done talking about this.
Okay, so that knight's gonna go back and forth. When he goes forward, we'll scoop some guys out.
With Media Matters tattletaling, saying Jones must be shut up. See, the enemies of freedom want me silenced. What I've said and done,
shit, watch out for the knight.
Putin is not going to back down, and Putin is not losing the war after 4 days. He's been holding Kiev and other major cities. And if he begins to smash those cities, because he can't handle the losses of sending his troops in with pinpoint strikes anymore.
Oh shit. He's probably counted his troops.
NATO will expand into several other countries, and Russia has said it will expand into former Eastern Bloc nations. Those making deals with NATO to bring weapons and off Moscow's warning of joining NATO. Let's start with that first.
Yeah.
And then let's get into the really biggest news here. And that is the default. Now, you knew that was coming, and we've talked a lot about that the last few weeks, but they're going to force Russia into a default.
You can always check us out on the stream.
Once you have sanctions that level, it forces you into a default.
Alex will be on at 5, hop back on.
And once that's happened,
at 5 when he gets over it.
That will suck down the rest of the major stock markets and currencies around the world, which is exactly what Klaus Schwab and the UN and the globalists want, because the IMF and the World Bank are the front groups of private banking families that own the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Bank of International Settlements. And they're going to call for the Global Marshall Plan, the new global digital currency that's on all your phones, just like the vaccine pass. But you can only spend the money certain places with certain companies, and with the money for rainbow tokens that they can then track and trace and control what you're allowed to buy with it. And that's been their plan. I told you 2 years ago, I said after the virus, they're going to run this for a couple of years, and then they're going to start a war, a cyber attack, a financial collapse, and then bring a more deadly virus back. And now that's what's happening. What Bill Gates is talking about. And you ask, how do I know all this? We take a long time to explain it. We do explain it here on air, but it's reading your own documents or white papers, watching other programming, watching what they signal their minions, and understanding history. And they might launch the big cyber attack first, or the financial collapse first, or a major war first, which you're already doing. I mean, there's a lot of angles. There's a lot of angles to this. Finland, Sweden brush off Moscow's warning on joining NATO. Finland and Sweden have brushed off warnings from neighbors, Russia, that their possible joining of NATO would trigger serious military and political consequences for Moscow for the two countries. A statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry Friday was concerned of what described as efforts by the United States and some of its allies to drag Finland and Sweden into NATO, and warned that Moscow would be forced to take retaliatory measures if they joined the alliance. Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto said Saturday, we've heard this before, and they went on to say, we don't think it calls for military threat. They want to say they're not worried about it. All right, let's continue. Russia extremely likely to default on debts if Ukraine crisis worsens. London, Reuters, Russia is extremely likely to default on its external debts, and its economy will suffer a double-digit contraction this year after the West announced sanctions, unprecedented scale and coordination. Minister of International Finance said on Monday. The central bank, which on Monday hiked interest rates, introduced some capital controls are held in countries which have imposed asset freezes, severely shrinking the firepower policymakers have to support the Russian economy. The central bank would prioritize the protection of domestic savers, with foreign investors one of the last on the list. And it goes on there. That will send ripples throughout the whole financial system worldwide, but that's okay because the big globalist banks have unlimited currency. They're ready to loan out to everybody to, again, get you in a position of total bankruptcy down the road in debt to them. Now, I played a clip earlier from a former Army colonel who was on Fox News explaining that Putin, whether you love him or hate him or neutral, has lost a lot of troops because they've been doing pinpoint strikes. Ahead of the real bear trap closing on the Ukrainians, and when they start using denial of area weapons, cluster bombs, barometric bombs, high-powered artillery, and they're going to start leveling every sector that their spy aircraft see fire coming from. And it's in a matter of hours, you can level thousands of buildings. Thousands. I'm talking level. So they don't want to flatten Kiev, but they got flattened in World War II. And at the end of the World War II, when the Russians came in and kicked out the dug-in Nazi sympathizers. And I get the Russians and atrocities too. I was telling you the history of this, okay? When Putin actually says he's fighting Nazis, the majority of the Ukrainian resistance really liked Hitler. Now, let's be completely honest about this. It's like Stockholm Syndrome. The Germans came in to Eastern Europe, and a lot of folks saw them as the saviors at first. And they started killing everybody, men, women, and children, so people started fighting back. Like, it's like Stockholm Syndrome. Who's abused you, you end up liking. Much of the Russian high command and a lot of their special forces, including the head of the Wagner group, pull up the head of the Wagner group, guys, type in his name, we'll show it, has SS tattoos all over him. And they have a whole Viking motif. The Russians were actually founded by the Vikings, so there's a major neo-Nazi thing all over Eastern Europe. And so it's really bad in Ukraine, and it's bad in Russia as well. But the whole, that's Ukrainian Nazis. But the whole point is that this is very serious, and people always fight the last war over again. So it may seem like a long time ago, 75 years, but if your granddaddy, or your great-granddaddy, great-grandma all died on either side, these are the old wounds that Zbigniew Brzezinski and Klaus Schwab and George Soros and Fareed Zakaria went in 8 years ago and financed with billions of dollars, $5 billion then, it's $10 billion since, to open those wounds up. So, I mean, the Civil War between the North and South killed 1.5 million people. And 100 years after the Civil War, there was still major fissures between the North and South. Now we've gotten over almost all of them. And now the South will elect a New Yorker, and love it because he's pro-American. Now you see more American flags in the South than you see rebel flags. But the point is, I'm not saying rebel flags are bad. It's part of the culture. It's not racist. It's a sign of resistance and strength and all the rest of it. That's what it actually stands for. It doesn't stand for slavery. But imagine 75 years after a civil war that killed 20 million Russians and probably 3 or 4 million Ukrainians and millions of Poles. At least 6 million Poles died in World War II. You think the people are a little pissed about that? Think people are a little angry? I think the Russians were in a good mood after World War II when 20 million of them died. And they went into Berlin and fought Hitler toe-to-toe. Lost millions just taking Berlin. They estimate 2 million Russians died taking Berlin. They estimate over 2 million German soldiers died and millions of civilians. But about 3 or 4 million Germans died just in Berlin, folks, in the taking of Berlin. Look it up. Men, women, and children. And so you can imagine Russia still has a hangover and a major, is pissing blood, basically, from the fight they just had. 1/3 of the Germans died in World War II. 1/3 of them. 20+% of the Russians died. Imagine a war where 20% of the people, you go knock on 10 apartment doors and 2 people are dead. Think of those numbers. So that's what Putin says in these speeches. He says, listen, you want a war? You want a nuclear war? Let's just do it right now. We're not rolling over this time. We're not going to wait till you invade us. If you want to fight, you got it. And you got a bunch of weird leftists that don't even know that are child molesters all over U.S. television saying, we want your kids. We're going to get your kids. I mean, it's the last thing they should be saying. You got Abramovich, the high priest witch, all over TV saying, I mean, this is not good, folks. We'll be right back.
25 years. And long before I started selling high-quality vitamin D3 8 years ago, I've been promoting people taking vitamin D3 because it is essential. And if you're not getting sunshine every single day, whether you're black or white or Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Your body will be susceptible and wide open to so many of the threats that are out there. It's just like you need oxygen. You die in 4 minutes without oxygen. You die in 5 or 6 days without water. You die in a month without food. Well, that's because these key minerals and elements and vitamins are in the food that you need. And one of the most important for your immune system and your overall health is vitamin D3. We have the highest quality in winter sun with vitamin K that boosts all your body's defenses, available right now for 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com. Everybody, old, young, black, white, you need vitamin D3. This is the best quality out there, and it funds the InfoWar. 50% off.
InfoWars, the most banned network in the world.
And it's time for you might to stand up in the InfoWar and say, I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this, but you want to fight, you got me, you got one!
From the front lines of the information war, it's Alex Jones.
Alex Jones is the greatest.
Dude,
He has been so canceled.
Alex is right about far more than he's wrong.
How much heat have you gotten for being friends with him and having him on the show?
A lot, but I don't pay attention.
Okay. Yeah.
I can justify it. I'll tell you, that guy is right about a lot of shit. He's a wild entertainer and a brilliant man.
Isn't he fantastic?
And no one is perfect. I've known Alex for like more than 20 years. I've hung out with that guy. We've been hammered together so many times. It's like, that is the most misunderstood guy on the planet.
Alex has been right on tour over a decade.
Shout out to Alex Jones. We love you.
Alex Jones is a journalist and member of the media. End of story. Recently, many of the biggest tech companies joined in a coordinated effort to censor content from broadcaster Alex Jones.
There's a reason why the mainstream media calls a guy like him a bomb thrower or a conspiracy theorist, because they're in fear of the truth that he does actually bring out.
Why are the most powerful companies in the world suddenly so threatened by an independent radio show host in Texas that they're willing to lose business in order to make him shut up? He runs a media organization. And so when the January 6th committee subpoenas him, they are basically violating our First Amendment protections.
The Department of Justice says not only is it investigating what happened inside the Capitol, but the conspirators and instigators who may have started this whole thing.
Now the committee's decided to shut down one of the most popular journalists on the right, Alex Jones. Yes, journalist.
The House committee investigating the deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol is subpoenaing Trump allies Roger Stone and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones.
The committee says he helped organize the rally ahead of the riots.
Alex Jones isn't simply innocent of inciting crime on January 6th. Alex Jones actively worked to prevent crimes from taking place on January 6th.
Let's start marching to the Capitol! Yes, our leader said, we're not burning buildings down or shooting cops. We're building America up. We're here to take our rightful country back. Peacefully.
We're not running interference for Alex Jones, and we're not guessing about it. We happen to know this for a fact.
Maybe even not have a conversation with the police. They're going to make that the story.
Alex Jones is a journalist the same as Brian Stelter and Jake Tapper and Don Lemon are.
Absolutely.
Well,
I was about
actually,
to say the same thing.
Some people
Don't insult Alex that way.
Well, yeah, Alex Jones never led us into a war. Right. Alex Jones never bought the Russia hoax, not for a second. And if Jones said that with Tony Fauci, he would ask him real questions, just as journalists are supposed to do. He wouldn't just slobber all over it.
Epstein, he was way ahead with that. He told me about Epstein a decade ago. Alex detailed all of that.
Alex Jones, InfoWars. The media has tarnished him with all sorts of name-calling, conspiracy theorist, bomb thrower. The one thing that I know about this gentleman, Alex Jones, is that he loves this country. He is as smart as a whip. He absolutely believes in what he believes in, and he also does his research and his homework.
Coolly compare Hotez's views on COVID to, say, Alex Jones's views on COVID and ask yourself, who's saner? It's not even close.
He's incredibly detailed in his research. He loves this country. He is a patriot. And he's somebody who we better listen to, or others in this country better listen to.
Is it a stretch to say that Tucker Carlson is the new Alex Jones?
There are no vaccine passports. That's insane. It's Alex Jones stuff. And by the way, just so you know, as proof, if you want to get a job, you'll need your vaccine papers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live broadcasting worldwide, and Curtis Yarvin is in studio with us. Mencius Mole Bug. I've heard a lot about his work, read a lot of his writings over the years. He's a very interesting person. He's here visiting in Austin. And I'm not going to go over the software he's written or the books or articles or all the things he's done. You've worn a lot of hats here, and it's good to have you. People can find you at graymirror.substack.com. That's Gray Mirror, and that's Curtis Yarvin. All right, good to have you here. And you're also known as an absolute monarchist, huh?
I am an absolute monarchist. I'm absolutely an absolute monarchist. And I will defend that standpoint. I'm America's leading monarchist partner.
Wow. And you were telling me you had family in the Foreign Service. You know about the deep state, this whole Russian thing. We should probably go there first.
Let's go there first.
Give me your view on this escalating situation. Who you think the bad guys are, or why you think both sides are doing it. What do you think of the massing Russian troops? Obviously, they want them to capitulate. They're going to launch a much larger, devastating attack. The media is saying the Russians are losing. I'm sorry, they're not losing. They have been doing pinpoint strikes to try to get the regime to stand down. Instead, our media is saying, peasants, go out and fight the Russian military. You're going to beat them. And all that's going to happen is one of the biggest bloodbaths since World War II. What's your view?
My view is more or less exactly that. My view is, this is a war between two countries that are a very great distance from us. I don't have the feeling of having a dog in the fight. I don't think this country has a dog in the fight. But this government has a dog in the fight. The U.S. government definitely has a dog in the fight. That dog is Ukraine. You probably heard the Victoria Nuland call.
I have. It says, screw the EU, screw Russia.
Yeah, and she's basically picking the members of the next Ukrainian government. And, sort of growing up as a Foreign Service brat, my dad was in the Foreign Service, which, in case you don't know, is it's the State Department. It's the sort of U.S. agency that goes around.
Everybody talks about the CIA. The CIA is like the janitor. The State Department actually runs things.
Yeah, the State Department is really the center of things. And, it's like, you remember, Julian Assange came out, and kind of one of his first things, he's takes on the DOD with this, targeting video, and all the journalists are approved. They all clap, right? And I'm like, oh, man, anyone can take on the DOD. And then he comes out with these cables, and he takes on the State Department. And I'm just
we knew it was it for him then.
I'm just like, this Australian has no idea who he's fucking with, right? And, part of my first sort of exposure to the reality of the situation is I'm growing up, I'm a Foreign Service brat, and my dad was stationed in Portugal, and he used to use me to proofread his unclassified cables. And I'm reading these cables, and I'm like, the relationship between these governments is not a relationship of equals. I'm like, we have a treaty with Portugal that basically says if Portugal is attacked, America will defend it. But if America is attacked, the Portuguese will defend us. And I'm like, no, that's not really do we need Portugal? Do we? And so you sort of realize that the purpose of the U.S. Embassy in Portugal is not to relate as a peer-to-peer thing with the Portuguese government. It's actually to supervise the Portuguese government. And this is basically a satellite state relationship. This is an empire, like so many empires in the past, basically kind of masquerading as an alliance. And
when did America become the new global British Empire?
Well, after World War I. World War sort of
phasing in from World War I to World War II.
Phasing in from World War I to World War II. So, in World War I, of course, kind of we come in late, and then we're like, we don't want to be part of this League of Nations thing, but sort of American kind of diplomats and elites had already gotten this taste of kind of world power. After World War I, the financial balance of power shifts from the U.S., from the UK to the U.S., and so you basically have, the U.S. becomes the world's biggest creditor nation and can kind of jerk people around financially, which is, of course, what we're doing in Russia right now. And I have serious concerns about, like, if you say, okay, you have these foreign reserves, you have $600 billion, right, in reserves, except guess what? They're on our banks and we'll just close your account. We'll freeze your account like you're a Canadian trucker or something, right? And it's like, well, how do you expect people to think about reserves after doing something like that? They're just like, this is an IOU that we can just cancel? Like,
absolutely. So the big central banks are discrediting themselves with all of this micromanaging social credit score. And unless you're a pure dictatorship like China, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and you're basically saying you're sort of doing two things at the same time, because we in the U.S. basically eat off of our dollar hegemony, right? This is a country that runs like $1 trillion trade deficit, which means $1 trillion of red ink every year that's basically going to buy things that are made in China that we can't make anymore. And, where's that money coming from?
And there's an understanding of that globally and a lot of moves away from it. What do you think is going to happen? Who are the main power players? And what do you think this situation in Russia is going to trigger?
Well, imagine if you're Russia and especially China looking at this. And both Russia and China run trade surpluses, which basically running a trade surplus as a country, that's like a company turning a profit. Running a trade deficit is like a country making a loss. And so you have this country that's basically losing a ton of money every year that doesn't make anything anymore. And you're dealing with these autocratic powers, Russia and China, that are sort of rising exporting nations. Russia, of course, exports mainly natural resources. They keep all of Western.
So folks are aware that the U.S. is trying to boss everybody around while it has this giant deficit and they don't.
Right, and it's like you're trying to do too many things at the same time. It's like you can run this deficit and you can sort of eat for free off of dollar hegemony, and then you're just like, we're going to boss everyone around using our dollar hegemony, and it's like, it's really...
And my concern is trying to force Russia to leave the international Bretton Woods agreement and monetize their debt like we've been doing isn't going to hurt us, it's going to hurt us. And they're talking about defaulting on their sovereign debt right now.
Yeah. And, there's sort of all kinds of sort of countermeasures that, Russia can play, where they're like, okay, Germany, you want gas? Send us gold. We're not sending...
You're a smart guy. When you think about this, how do you think, what are your main concerns? What do you think's about to happen? Because I don't like war, but I get NATO is moving weapons up against Russia. They told them for 8 years, stop it. And now Putin's getting ready to literally, you want to call it war crimes, he's going to get ready to flatten cities if they don't surrender. So as much as I don't want war with Russia, this is going to take the world very close to that.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of hard to understand. I mean, one of the things you got to understand about the way that the State Department and the kind of U.S. oligarchy works is there's no sort of central actor. There's no kind of central brain. There's no one...
They come up with consensus.
There's no one in charge. There's basically no one in charge. There's a bunch of kind of independent actors who are thinking in this kind of independent way about their own careers.
That's how the CIA works.
Yeah, that's how it all works. There's no center. There's no little man behind the curtain. And so there's basically Ukraine policy is being driven by a bunch of people in the State Department who want to feel important, who want to, to advance their careers just like anyone else. And, they sort of can't really step back. No one ever fires himself. No one is ever like, okay.
And may I suggest they advance their career by not getting a nuclear war?
Yeah. But, the thing is, remember the Arab Spring? Right? Remember
that was all their idea.
That was all their idea. And remember what a shit show that was. Nobody involved in that. Nobody was like, oh, let's start a civil war in Syria and Libya. No one's career suffered. Right? Because they mattered.
Anderson Cooper was in Baghdad. Look how wonderful this is. They're burning everything now.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I have to confess, Alex, I believed in the Iraq War. It was that long ago. I was for it. I was in neocon. And, I was like, we can civilize them. We can turn them into West Germany.
Well, you don't look that old. Hell, I was pretty young in 2003, but I was against it. So it's we can ignore that mistake. How old were you in 2003?
How old was I in 2003? I was 3. So, yeah, I'm This hair makes me look insane.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's good.
But
I can take some of your hair as a transplant. All my hair is giving up the ghost. All right, stay there, Curtis Garvin. We're going to get into, you're an absolute monarchist. You know, Paul Joseph Watson is a guest of this show, and he still does some work with us. He's a monarchist now.
That's awesome.
He gets invited over there and hangs out with them. I'm not kidding. He actually eats, like, steaks with the Queen and stuff. Oh, Paul, I'm giving Paul secrets out. I can talk about it. I'm not a monarchist, so.
No, you're a Democrat. You're a believer in
No, I don't believe in the mob either. I believe in a republic. Be right back. Well, having fascinating talks during the breaks with Curtis Garvin about his view on absolute monarchy or monarchism, and so many other great terms like the Dark Enlightenment and so much more. He's quite the prolific thinker out there, and it's great to have him here with us. As much as I want to get into Russia and the current war there and where this is going, let's get into your monarchist views and some of your ideas. You were saying some wild stuff during the break.
All right, yeah. So, if you go back to Aristotle, who basically invented political science, Aristotle tells you that there's 3 forms of government. There's monarchy, which is the rule of one. A lot of people, when they think about monarchy, sort of make 2 kinds of essential mistakes. First of all, they look at the monarchies we have today, like Elizabeth II, which is basically, she's not actually in charge of the government of England.
She's a vestigial thing.
Yeah, she's a vestigial thing. She's a crown Kardashian, basically. She's a celebrity, and it's a beautiful thing. But if you compare Elizabeth II to Elizabeth I, you're talking about a whole different thing. And it's like if you try to imagine the UK without Elizabeth II, without a monarchy, same thing, same country, life goes on. Try to imagine Elizabethan England without Elizabeth I. You're like, I don't know what it is, but it's not Elizabethan England, right? And so, and monarchy is basically the system of government that has ruled the whole human race for 98% of human history. It's kind of the default. And, another way to think about the question is to sort of notice that basically anything that works, any functioning institution, a restaurant, it's a car company, it's a monarchy. You drive a car, that car was made by an organization governed by a single person, a CEO, that's monarchy. You go to a restaurant, it's run by a chef. You watch a movie, it's directed by a director. You see, you send a package in UPS, that's a monarchy. You send a package in USPS, that's an oligarchy. And so you're sort of noticing the kind of difference between, like, if you try to run, and I've been a CEO, and if you try to run any organization by committee, management by committee, that's kind of a watchword for, like, this is going to fail. Like, imagine, you're running a company, you're running InfoWars, you try to run InfoWars with, like, a Congress and the Supreme Court or something. I mean, it would be a disaster.
You spend all your time just having those meetings.
You spend all your time just having those meetings, right?
But what about the North Korea argument? Because that's a 3rd-generation communist monarchy, and it's not doing too well.
Oh, it's absolutely not doing too well. And the thing you've got to remember about basically history for the last 200 years, ever since basically the Congress of Vienna, is that we've lived in a unipolar Anglo-American world for 200 years. And so any state, any regime that is basically positions itself against that world and its sort of tendency to subvert and kind of destroy all other competing forces, whether it's, Kaiser Wilhelm II or Gaddafi or whatever, or Kim Jong-un, is that they're basically at war against...
By the way, we'll have to go in the next hour. We're going to do a 10-hour podcast. You're a smart guy. I'm not saying I agree with monarchy or whatever, but you're right. People don't know about the Conference of Vienna. They don't know about when the British Empire became hyper-dominant, then merged with the U.S., and that has created a type of entropy or stagnation that's not been good. I want America to be powerful, but the entropy of that has actually dominated us as well. People inside the empire are as enslaved as people outside the empire. So elaborate on the Conference of Vienna and then move forward from what you're saying.
So basically, like, if you're resisting that Anglo-American force, like the last kind of peer competitor was Napoleon. Napoleon is a monarch, right? Napoleon loses. And,
Yeah.
And ever since then, basically, it's like So you're talking about Kim Jong-un, you're like, this is a rebel against the global order, and he's running this rebellion out of North Korea, and that's going to be like, you're rebelling against the whole world. That's going to be really ugly. So if you compare like Kim Jong-un to like Louis XIV or Frederick the Great or something, there you're sort of seeing, you know, kind of glorious monarchies from the old days, and it's like living in Louis XIV's France wasn't like living in North Korea.
Yeah, exactly. A monarch can't be powerful unless they're expansionist and bringing wealth into the empire.
Well, they have to be sovereign. They have to be independent. And Kim Jong Un lives in a world governed by hostile powers.
Well, that's right. So he's a viceroy of the Chinese.
Yes, but even the Chinese are basically sort of on the back foot. They live.
They're viceroys of Goldman Sachs and BlackRock.
They live in an American-dominated world, and they know it. And they're basically a product of the 20th century. And like they're like, how do we become independent? And even China finds it really, really hard to be independent of the deep state. And what you're seeing right now with these sanctions on Russia. China and Russia are of course natural allies, but the Chinese are like, hey, maybe we can't do business with Russia because America will sanction us. That's basically sort of the power dynamic there. And you know, it's really.
I want to get to that, but back to the absolute monarchy. So what would that look like? If you're going to follow an absolute monarchy, is that for certain areas of the world, or is there one global monarchy you should take over?
I think one global superstate is a really bad idea, and that's one thing I hate about basically the American empire. It's this sort of superstate model.
We need firewalls.
Yeah, you need firewalls. You can't have the whole planet putting all of its eggs in one basket, because anything can go wrong, anything can go bad.
But isn't a country putting its eggs in one basket with a monarchy?
Yeah, but a country is one basket by definition, right? And so, yeah, you have to basically put your egg, you know, Mark Twain had this great line, put your eggs in one basket and watch that basket. Right now we have all of our eggs in one basket, which is kind of this sort of deep state, what I call the cathedral, kind of media university complex. And it's like when people look at this media university complex, they're like, oh, we have all these different newspapers, we got the Post, we got the Times, but they're all speaking with the same voice. Like Harvard and
Yale. No, exactly. It's like they're all in the church reading off the same hymn book.
They're synoptic, as they say in the Gospels, right? You know, and so you're like, hey, wait a second, you know, this is one institution. It doesn't have one center, but it has one set of ideas. And it's like if you believe that this institution kind of naturally converges on the truth, and it's always as close to the truth as it can get, that's one thing. But when you start to see it, like, make really huge, silly mistakes, like...
It's like a franchise. It's like McDonald's is everywhere, but it's the same.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, the thing is, basically, when you think about monarchy, you're like, okay, well, you're putting your eggs in one basket, but we are putting our eggs in one basket right now. It's just a hard...
Well, the successful monarchies do is like letter of marque and stuff. They elevate people that have success.
Yeah.
And then that's what they do. You can say, oh, that's mean. Well, no, that lifts everything up.
Napoleon had this line, you know, every government is safe in which the best people are in power. And, you know, that was true in the early days of the American kind of post-war global order. The people who were running it were just amazing. You know, they were, and it made a lot of sense for other countries to look to America and say, how should we do things? Right? And today, it's like...
Now we have the great-grandchildren, the spoiled brats of those people running things.
That's right. And so Afghanistan is like, hey, America, how should we do things? And America is like...
cut your son's balls off.
Cut your son's balls off, right? You know, and it's like, well... And
as if they didn't know they'd rebel against that.
Yeah, and it's like I feel really bad for the Ukrainians because basically you have all these really good, dear, sweet people in Ukraine that are basically like, I want to do things the American way. America will protect us. The American way works well. And it's like, no.
We don't want to kill any of the women.
Like, we can't do that anymore. Like, we can't provide those people with protection. And so they're just like, it's really sad.
And they got goaded. I'm sure you've seen the ship clippers. Like, we got to fight the Russians in Ukraine now. Weapons. And they wonder why the Russians attack.
Yeah, exactly. They got goaded into this.
Let's talk about it when we come back. This is Big Nez. Well, Curtis Yarvin is definitely an interesting person. I'm glad he's in the studio with us today in Austin, Texas. And I got to ask a lot of questions here. He was getting into Russia during the break, but just in general, what are other things you're thinking about and working on right now?
Well, you know, we have this oligarchical kind of institutional system here in America, and I'm very radical with my perspective on it because I kind of grew up inside it. You know, I grew up in the Foreign Service. You know, I went to an Ivy League school, and I think there's a lot of people who believe these institutions can be saved.
That's right. You went to Johns Hopkins, Brown University, and University of Berkeley. So you're saying that basically an oligarchy is like a distributed monarchy of idiots.
Yeah, right. I mean, the thing is, the power of all governments is the same. All governments have ultimately absolute power. If they sort of give you rights, that's their choice eventually. And what we have today is a sort of distributed network of like prestige. And what matters is like when you're a journalist for the New York Times, you're someone whose opinion matters. You're a professor at Harvard. Your opinion counts. You have prestige. You're respected. And in the past, like what's been happening sort of ever since this kind of, we're still living, I mean, global American empire is basically the New Deal, right? And so you're living in this empire created by our grandfathers, and those people were very, very capable and very, very competent, and they knew what they were doing. You don't have to like it. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But, you know, sort of prestige and competence have been drifting away from each other. And the idea that you're going to get that to drift back is really, 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 like, it's hard for me to fathom how that could even possibly work.
Well, the establishment works with Common Core instead to literally destroy knowledge. What elite would want to make their minions dumb? That ends up making them weak. It's horrible.
Yeah,
horrible.
Right. And so the question is, you know, what's the cure? How do you basically solve this elite? And I think most, you know, Americans, and probably most InfoWars watchers, basically believe in a kind of ultimately democratic solution to this, sort of the people rising up and taking back their government. I'm very pessimistic about that. I don't believe the American people are really strong enough to do that. I think that basically reconstructing, this is kind of why I'm a modern monarchist, is that basically if you look at what it takes to clean up a system like this, it's a monarchy. And so you basically have to shut down these institutions, Alex. Like there's no other way. You can't basically change the way this country is governed and have Harvard and the New York Times exist as they exist today.
Well, you bring up two really big areas that I want to get your view on. Definitely the left worships itself and the establishment and the right-wing neocons because you're on CNN, because you're on the New York Times. Even though their readership's way down and their prestige is gone, they're a joke. Their minions still celebrate it and act like it's God, and so they're in their own crazy bubble, carrying out policies that actually accelerate their demise. So I agree that they're an incompetent.
Right, they're incompetent, but they're completely in charge. It doesn't take people reading the New York Times. It doesn't take mass readership of the New York Times for the New York Times to matter, because it matters to the people.
Because the ruling class takes it as the Bible. It's the cult spree, like how Jim Jones mouth. Sure, there's only 1,000 Jim Jones followers about to drink cherry Kool-Aid with cyanide, but the ruling class is in a cult, and when they order it, they drink it. When they order nukes to be launched, it'll happen.
I'll tell you a story from inside the deep state. So my stepfather actually worked for Biden for some time, and he studied political science at Harvard in the 60s. And one day he was taking a seminar from one of the great old wise men of U.S. foreign policy, George Bundy. And Bundy walks in the room in the seminar, and there's a newspaper strike at the time. Like the newsboys are on strike. This used to happen all the time. Bundy comes in the seminar, and he's like, well, you know, Washington can't function right now because our inter-office memo service is down, by which he means the New York Times. Right, and so you have this agency. It's really a government agency. If you think of the New York Times as a government agency, it kind of all makes sense.
No, it's true. It only communicates to the cult.
Yeah, right, and its importance is sort of that internal communication. So if you're basically like thinking about how do you win, how do you beat these people, it's like, you know, how do you beat Saddam Hussein? You have a decapitation strike, but how do you decapitate an oligarchy? You're trying to...
A bunch of mentally ill, dumbed down people that can't even wipe their own ass, but they're still in charge. And that's what's happening is they're like, oh, he's going to be on CNN, stop it. It's like 100,000 viewers, don't even care. But they're flipping out because it's their memo. It's their system. And so they don't even get the whole world's moved on from them, and they're still back over here fighting over it.
They're still in charge. They're still in charge, and they'll be in charge until someone takes that power away from them.
So where do you see it going? I mean, if really pessimistically being run by these people, it sounds like nuclear war.
I think it lasts. I I don't think the world has the energy for nuclear war right now. You know, it's like I was having this argument at a symposium with, do you know Mike Anton, the Flight 93 election guy? So I'm having this debate with Mike Anton on stage at the symposium, and he's like, it's all going to collapse, it's all going to fail, it's all going to fall apart tomorrow. And I'm like, Mike, you are such an optimist. Like, that's such optimism.
Yeah, the entropy will just keep you there.
You know, I'm like, what does the future look like if we stay on the course we are on today? It looks like the third world. It looks like Mexico. It looks like Chile. It looks like, ultimately, Venezuela.
Idiocracy.
Idiocracy and just, like, decay. And you know what? You know who's always going to do fine is the rich are always going to do fine. The rich in Venezuela and Mexico, they live in beautiful, great ways. They're absolutely fine with a third of the country being run by drug cartels. And, you know, they're insulated from that. But ordinary people are not going to be insulated from that. Ordinary people, if this, like, insane thing of, like, overusing our dollar hegemony sort of backfires on us. I mean, the U.S. has no manufacturing. No manufacturing.
Well, couldn't this Russia thing backfire?
Yeah, this Russia thing could backfire because basically, you know, as soon as China and Russia sort of realize that, you know, hey, our, like, foreign reserves are just an IOU from the Fed that can just be canceled basically at any point, like we're doing to Russia right now, it's sort of only a matter of time before they're like, okay, wait a second, what do we need the West for? And
well, it's like NFTs. It's what you believe. It's like bottle caps for trading.
Yeah,
or the dollar, or cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency and NFTs at least have something compared to the dying dollar. I mean,
the dollar, yeah. I mean, the dollar is like, you know, the dollar established this hegemony when U.S. was the world's leading creditor nation, when the world's was leading manufacturing nation. Let me tell you a story, which is you drive down I-95 on the East Coast and you cross the Susquehanna at Trenton. There's a big sign on the bridge that says, Trenton makes the world ticks. This was actually a slogan coined by my own great-great-grandfather in a contest. And you look at this slogan and it makes no sense at all because what the hell does Trenton make? It doesn't make anything. But when that slogan was coined, New Jersey was the China of its day. They made everything there. You know, there was the center of world manufacturing. And I look at this now and I'm like, what should that sign say? And it should say, Trenton spends, the world lends, right? And like, how long are you going to be able to keep that up? And the thing is, if you basically lose that financial hegemony, the U.S. is Argentina. What do we export? Crops.
Well, let me talk about the ruling Western Anglo-American establishment's biggest weakness when we come back. I want to get your take on it. They're at war against independence. They want everyone to operate under their mental control. They've got a very pedophilic, pervert, anti-family stripe down their back. And so they're busy attacking the Midwest and the South and other rural areas that are the most productive. So they're busy trying to tell the world what to do while they attack their own people and look for a civil war to secure their political power, when if they wouldn't have started all these fights, they wouldn't be in so much trouble. Curtis Yarvin's our guest. We'll come back and talk to him. And the best place for people to find your works on Substack?
graymirror.substack.com. That's Gray with an A, the American way.
All right, and you know our evil website, only way to promote it is you, Infowars.com. And all the videos going viral is Band.video. The cure to the globalist disease lives at Band.video. But you can't share Band.video on Twitter or Facebook and places. It's blocked. So, battleplan.news is the news site till they ban that in a week. Battleplan.news. Stay with us. We've got a battle plan. Curtis Yarvin's our guest here on the Alex Jones Show. I'll host a little bit the next hour and hand the baton to the great Gerald Celente here on this live Monday edition. We really are praying for peace with this conflict, this inter-Slavic civil war going on, because Russia is jealous of NATO's attempt to take over its consort. We'll continue to break all that down. So, Curtis Yarvin, who do you see as the new monarchs of our age? Can't have one globalist. I guess Putin does kind of want to be the new czar. He's kind of setting up a monarchy.
He is. I mean, you know, Putin is in some ways, you know, there's this famous old saying about Russia. Russia is never as strong as she looks. Russia is never as weak as she looks. And like Putin, you know, that sort of fits Putin to a T, because he's not really as strong as a czar. He's got a lot of internal constituencies. He's got to follow, and of course the deep state is very aware of that and kind of trying to break them down with those things. And, you know, the extent to which if you're Putin, you feel like you're on the defensive is like really, you can't understate that. Like, he feels that he's defending himself against the world.
I think that makes him stronger.
Yeah, I mean, that's where he's cornered, right? You know, and sort of all of these, any regime that sort of doesn't kind of feel the pleasure of Washington, that's like, you know, Washington, you know, it's like, you know, Gaddafi made this sort of tremendous mistake where he's like, after 9/11, Gaddafi's like, holy shit, these guys are serious. So I have this nuclear program. I'm going to, like, put it in a box.
He groveled, gave them everything they wanted, and literally raped him to death with a bayonet.
That is correct. Or some other sharp object. It wasn't pretty. You know, and yeah, and that's exactly right. He sort of opened himself. It was like dealing with a predator, you know, the frog and the scorpion, right? You know, basically, Gaddafi was the frog. He was.
Tell the scorpion says, "Give me a ride." And
yeah. You know, the frog is, you know, swimming across the water. This is there's sort of so much of, like, the U.S. deep state in this story. The frog is like, oh, I'm going to cross the river. The scorpion's like, give me a ride. Halfway across, the scorpion stings the frog, right? And the frog is like, if I die, you die. And the scorpion is like, I can't help it. It's my nature. I'm the scorpion. Right, and so Gaddafi sort of opens himself up, and he's like, okay.
He is the frog.
He is the frog. And he's basically like,
the NATO scorpion, you couldn't help it.
Why would they sting me? What are they going to get by doing it? And the thing,
that's the key, there's not logic to it.
There's not logic to it because there's no single, basically, actor there. And so as soon as what happens is, here's what happens. Gaddafi opens up. He's like, okay, I'm going to be part of the world economy.
I'll invest all the money where you say. He didn't just give up the WMDs. He bent over.
He bent over, right. And the net result is, here's what happens in Libya when Gaddafi bends over. Before, you know, there's an American embassy operating in Tripoli. If you want to matter in Libya, you got to matter to the Gaddafi family. Gaddafi's a monarchy. Gaddafi's a monarch. You got to go and, like, you know, curtsy before him. Suddenly, when there's an American embassy in Tripoli, there's two power centers in Libya, right? And so you're looking at a situation where if you want to matter in Libya, maybe you're like, oh, you know, I want to, like, cozy up to the U.S. Embassy. And the U.S. Embassy sort of does that for a living. They're like, oh, okay, you know, we're in touch with all the Libyan dissidents. And then the Libyan dissidents are like, okay, maybe we're Islamists, but we're moderate Islamists.
So they bring Al-Qaeda back in to please the U.S.
Yeah, and you know, and then they're like, oh, we're going to have a little rebellion. How about some air support? And Gaddafi is like, wait a second, like, why do you want to start a civil war in Libya? And the scorpion is like, because I can, because it's my nature.
Those that know, they wanted to push blacks out.
Yeah, I mean...
And then he said, no, we're not going to blow the black people up.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy stuff is going on in that country now. Like, they have slave markets, they have a, you know, permanent civil war.
And literally, Hillary Clinton did that.
Yeah, remember
I saw he died.
Yeah, it was really like, and it was like that, you know, that specific moment was just so...
And Russia, Putin quotes that. He said, the last straw for me was Libya. You're not doing this with us.
Yeah, and basically...
And I'm not even defending Putin, but I get what's happening.
That's right, and I think that's the right approach to this conflict. It's like, you know,
He's watching him blow up all these countries and get away with it.
I don't feel I have a dog in the fight. I'm not rooting for Putin, you know, but at the same time, I, like, understand where he's coming from. And he's basically like, if we let the U.S. set up this kind of anti-Russia in Ukraine, which is what they're trying to do, then basically, like, everything is sort of going to fall to shit in our country. And
well, that's the thing, is they're always comparing Putin to Hitler. It's the Russians that lost 90% of the troops beating Hitler. The U.S. was involved, and not poo-pooing it. Both my grandfathers were involved, but we were a very small role, less than 10% compared to the Russians. The Russians fought the lion's share of the war. They lost 20 million people. And so they're saying, oh, he's Hitler. But Hitler was expanding borders and grabbing countries. Putin's not been doing that. They've been losing land, and he's saying, don't push anymore. So for the Russians, this is a repeat of World War II, and they're saying, we're not going to wait till you're 50 miles from Moscow this time.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, both in World War I and World War II, basically, sort of the attack on Russia involved creating this sort of independent state out of the Ukraine, which is it's a little bit of an, you know, sort of an exaggeration, but
no, you're right. That's the corridor of the attack.
Yeah, and it's like basically turning Texas into an independent country. Okay, Texas was an independent country. People in Texas, they speak a little funny. They say y'all.
You know, it's the same argument. Well, Texas used to be somebody else.
Yeah, right. And so, you know, then you're like, okay, Russia is going to, like, arm the moderate Texans and, like, you know, give Texas, like, you know, air support and cover and, you know, create an anti-American ideology in Texas. And you're just like, why are you doing this? what possible need does an ordinary American who funds this operation, who pays their taxes every year, why do we need a goddamn satellite state in the middle of Central Europe? And the answer is there's no possible answer to that.
Well, that's it. NATO and the U.S. and all these global forces are setting up a satellite state and saying we want to teach the kids LGBT. Did you see that?
Yeah, sure.
Which is exactly what Putin's saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like there's no, when you as an American taxpayer are basically funding this empire, okay, maybe a long time ago there was kind of this justification, okay, well, we're going to export more cars to these countries or something, we're going to conquer them for a reason, but now it's just the scorpion doing its scorpion thing.
Well, the scorpion says we're interested in your children.
The scorpion.
And people are like, okay, that's it. Yeah, it's like, what?
The scorpion just
want our children. Because Putin's saying they want our kids, and the MI6 goes, we want your kids.
Yeah, the scorpion, you know, because what the scorpion is made of, Alex, is the scorpion is made of ordinary, smart people, good people, wonderful people who have careers. And they want to get ahead in their careers, and the way you get ahead in your career in D.C. is by making an impact. And so
that's right. So even if they lie once, well, I got bills, I'm going to lie, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to push, I'm going to put out fake intelligence, and I'll get promoted.
Yeah, I'm going to, like, you know, I'm going to matter. I'm going to make an impact. And so, you know, it's like we were saying earlier, the people in D.C. who made the Arab Spring happen, who were like, we're going to start a civil war in Syria, we're going to start a civil war in Libya, we're going to try to start a civil war in Egypt and fail at that. You know, I mean, this has killed 500,000, 1 million people, right? And it's like there's sort of no consequences from that. There's no, like, sense of, like, oh, wow, you did the wrong thing, you harmed people, and it's like, at least the scorpion drowns. I mean, but
yeah, they never get in trouble for what they've done. So, Curtis, let me ask you this. What comes next in your view?
In the short term or long term?
All of it, just real quick.
In the short term, I think Putin wins his war. I think that and I think that that's giving a sort of bloody nose to the deep state is, like, much as I hate to see that happen and much as I, like, hate to see...
Oh, that's going to stir them up.
That's going to, yeah, but it's also, like, nobody likes to lose. And it's like, you know, losing in Afghanistan, you know, that was sort of a big thing because it was like, here's a spot on the map that the U.S. does not control and will never control. I don't have any really more sympathy for the Taliban than I have for Putin, but it's like, this is a foreign country. You know, Ukraine is a foreign country. Russia is a foreign country. And so
what does the deep state do when they get a bloody house?
They sit and take it. And, like,